Hello everyone, and welcome. I'm excited to kick off this presentation with you today. Our first slide is titled Module Overview, and I want to start by highlighting that this module is like a vital economic compass. We'll be exploring the key indicators that shape our economic health, influence policy decisions, and impact our daily lives. Throughout this session, we'll focus on monitoring jobs and inflation, two crucial components of understanding the economy. So, let's get started and dive into how these indicators guide us in making informed decisions. Let's take a moment to reflect on what behind every statistic truly means. It's not just numbers, it's about real people. Families who are navigating through financial stress, disrupted routines, and an uncertain future. When we talk about unemployment, it's crucial to understand that its impact goes far beyond the economic figures. It touches lives in profound ways, affecting mental health, relationships, and community stability. Recognizing these deeply human consequences helps us appreciate the full scope of the issue and emphasizes why addressing unemployment is so vital for our society. As unemployment rises, we often see a ripple effect across communities, impacting not just individuals but society as a whole. Higher unemployment tends to increase demand for health care and social services, because people are facing more stress and health issues. It can even lead to higher crime rates in affected areas, which adds to the social costs we have to consider. Prolonged joblessness doesn't just mean someone isn't working. It can cause skills to degrade over time, making it harder to find new employment later on. This also reduces lifetime earnings, which affects not just the individual but their families and communities. On a psychological level, unemployment brings severe stress and hardship, impacting mental health and overall well-being. From an economic standpoint, unemployed workers represent unused productive capacity. That's a direct drag on our GDP and overall national prosperity because those resources, people's skills and time, are not being utilized to their full potential. And it's important to remember, unemployment is more than a number. It has real, tangible consequences at every level of society, from individuals and families to communities and the entire economy. That's why understanding why unemployment matters is crucial for addressing its root causes and mitigating its impacts effectively. In March 2026, the U.S. unemployment rate remained steady at 4.3%, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. This percentage reflects the portion of the labor force that is currently jobless but actively seeking work and available to take a job. It's a key indicator of the overall health of the job market. Maintaining this rate suggests a relatively stable employment situation, which is important when we consider the broader economic trends we've been discussing. It shows that, at this point, the labor market isn't experiencing significant turbulence, providing a foundation of stability as we look ahead. Let's take a closer look at some key indicators beyond the headline unemployment rate. First, we see the involuntary job separations, or layoffs, which stand at 2.08% in January 2026, according to the Chicago Fed. This percentage gives us a sense of how many workers are leaving jobs unexpectedly, often due to layoffs or company closures. Next, we have the share of unemployed workers who are actually finding new jobs. In January 2026, that rate is 45.1%, which reflects the hearing rate, how quickly people are moving from unemployment back into employment. Then, there's the total number of jobs in the economy, which increased by 178,000 in March 2026, based on data from the BLS. This number highlights the ongoing growth in payroll employment, showing us that the economy is adding jobs despite some of the challenges. Overall, these indicators, layoffs, hearing rates, and job growth, offer a more complete picture of the labor market's health. They help us understand the underlying dynamics that the headline unemployment rate alone might not fully reveal, giving us a better sense of how resilient or flexible the job market really is. For millions of workers each year, unemployment isn't just a setback, it's often a transition. It can be stressful, no doubt about it, but it's also a phase that can be navigated successfully. The key is having the right support and conditions in place. When those are available, what might seem like a roadblock becomes an opportunity for growth and new beginnings. This journey from being jobless to finding new employment is a process, one that involves resilience, resources, and sometimes a bit of patience. It's important to recognize that with the proper guidance and support systems, most people can make this transition smoothly. This idea ties back to our overall theme, creating a resilient workforce. By understanding these transitions, we can better support workers through the ups and downs, helping them emerge stronger on the other side. Even in the healthiest economies, some level of unemployment always exists. It's just a natural part of how economies function. No matter how strong or well-managed a system is, there will always be people transitioning between jobs or entering the workforce for the first time. Understanding why this persistent unemployment occurs is really key. It helps us craft better policies that can minimize unnecessary hardship. And it also helps us set realistic expectations for what governments and individuals can achieve. So, recognizing that some unemployment is inevitable allows us to focus on managing it effectively, rather than trying to eliminate it entirely. This understanding ties into the overall theme of how we balance economic stability with social well-being. Now, let's take a closer look at why unemployment occurs and how different types require different responses. Each type of unemployment has its own unique causes, which means that the policies to address them also need to be tailored accordingly. For example, when people are between jobs and searching for new opportunities, that's known as frictional unemployment. It's often temporary and can be helped through better job matching services or career counseling. Then we have structural unemployment, which happens when there's a skills mismatch or significant technological shifts in the economy. This type tends to be more persistent because it involves fundamental changes in the labor market, requiring retraining or education programs. There's also seasonal or policy-related unemployment. These are classified as other, caused by seasonal work cycles or government policies that temporarily reduce employment. Finally, cyclical unemployment is tied to the overall economic cycle. During downturns, demand drops, leading to layoffs, so addressing it often involves macroeconomic measures like monetary stimulus to boost the economy. The slide also highlights that some types of unemployment are high in persistence, especially structural ones, because they tend to last longer without intervention. Conversely, frictional and seasonal unemployment are usually low in persistence. They tend to resolve quickly as workers find new opportunities. Understanding these distinctions is crucial because it helps policymakers design more effective strategies, whether that's training programs, monetary policies, or other interventions, to reduce unemployment in its various forms. This approach aligns with our overall goal of creating a resilient and adaptable labor market. The natural rate includes frictional and structural unemployment. These are the types of unemployment that are always present in a healthy economy. Economists estimate this natural rate at approximately 4 to 5%. Full employment, then, means that the economy is operating at this natural rate, but it doesn't mean that everyone has a job. Even in a thriving economy, some unemployment is inevitable and even healthy. It allows for workers to find positions that match their skills and for the economy to adapt to changing conditions. So remember, full employment does not equal zero unemployment. It's about reaching that natural rate where the economy functions smoothly and efficiently. As we look at rising output per worker, it's important to understand that this increase, without a matching growth in jobs, can lead to concerns about wage inflation. Essentially, when labor becomes scarcer, wages might start climbing faster, which can impact overall costs for businesses. Now, this rise in productivity often comes from increased investment in machinery and technology on a per-worker basis. While this definitely boosts output, it also tends to slow down the creation of new jobs because companies are becoming more efficient, achieving more with the same or even fewer workers. This process is sometimes called capital deepening, where companies focus on investing in leaner, more efficient operations. They're optimizing their processes to get more work done without necessarily adding more people. And with the advent of generative AI and other advanced technologies, firms are deploying these tools to further boost output. The goal is to enhance productivity without a proportional increase in hiring, which is fundamentally changing how labor demand works in the modern economy. If we look ahead to early 2026, we see a pattern emerging. GDP growth is outpacing hiring, which raises some important questions about the future of work. How will we ensure enough jobs? How will wages and labor markets adapt? All of this ties into the broader productivity paradox, where we see productivity rising, but it doesn't always translate into proportional job growth, leading us to reconsider how we measure economic progress and employment health in this new era. Let's take a closer look at this slide. What we're seeing here is that the gap between GDP growth and employment growth is actually widening. This trend suggests that productivity is increasing, meaning we're getting more output from the same or fewer workers. And a big part of what's driving this is advances in AI, automation, and capital investment. These technologies are boosting efficiency, but also changing how businesses operate. Now, this shift has important implications. Policymakers and businesses need to adapt to this new dynamic. It's not just about growing the economy anymore. It's about managing the changing nature of work and productivity. You'll notice the chart comparing GDP growth and employment growth. It's clear that while output is up, hiring is happening more slowly. This raises a key question. Are we experiencing more output with fewer jobs? Or is it that automation is replacing routine jobs, so employment growth is lagging behind? Overall, this slide underscores a critical point for our future. As productivity rises thanks to technology, we must rethink policies and strategies to ensure inclusive growth and workforce resilience. When prices rise persistently across the economy, it has a significant impact on our everyday lives. As prices go up, our purchasing power slowly erodes. This means that the amount of goods and services we can buy with the same amount of money decreases over time. It's a quiet process that often goes unnoticed at first, but can have serious consequences. This erosion of purchasing power directly affects the real value of wages, meaning even if your paycheck stays the same, what it can buy diminishes. It also diminishes the value of savings, which might seem safe but can lose buying power if inflation is high. Ultimately, inflation can threaten economic stability by creating uncertainty and making it harder for households and businesses to plan for the future. This slide highlights the core problem of inflation, how it quietly chips away at our financial well-being and the overall health of the economy. Understanding this helps us see why controlling inflation is so important for maintaining economic stability. Let's talk about how even modest inflation can have a big impact over time. When inflation occurs, it gradually erodes the real value of your savings and fixed incomes. That means your money doesn't go as far as it used to. Central banks typically aim for around 2% annual inflation, which they see as a healthy baseline. Now, inflation is basically the rate at which the overall prices for goods and services increase. As prices rise, the purchasing power of your money decreases. You can't buy as much with the same amount. Understanding this helps us see why managing inflation is so crucial for maintaining financial stability and planning for the future. Today, I want to highlight the recent trends in inflation as measured by the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. Over the past 12 months ending in January 2026, the CPI increased by 2.4%. This means that, on average, prices paid by urban consumers for a fixed basket of goods and services have gone up by about 2.5% over the year. Looking at the most recent month, January 2026, the seasonally adjusted CPI rose by 0.2%. This monthly increase indicates a modest growth in prices from December to January, which is important for understanding short-term inflation trends. The CPI is a crucial measure because it captures the average change in prices that consumers face daily. It helps us gauge inflation and understand how the cost of living is evolving. Throughout this presentation, We see that tracking these changes is essential for making informed economic decisions, whether for policy, business planning, or personal finance. So, in essence, the CPI provides a clear snapshot of inflation, showing us how prices are changing over time and helping us assess the overall economic stability. Now, let's take a closer look at core inflation, which excludes the more volatile food and energy prices. This measure gives policymakers a clearer picture of the underlying price pressures in the economy. As you can see, the energy index has decreased by 0.1% over the past year, indicating some moderation in energy prices. Conversely, the food index has increased by 2.9% on a year-over-year basis, with a monthly rise of 0.2%. When we look at core inflation, excluding food and energy, prices have risen by 2.4% over the past year on a non-seasonally adjusted basis, and about 0.2% on a seasonally adjusted monthly basis. This differentiation is important because food and energy prices tend to be more unpredictable and can distort the overall inflation picture. By focusing on core inflation, we get a better sense of the more persistent trends in price changes that impact consumers and policymakers alike. Overall, understanding these components helps us gauge the true inflationary pressures within the economy, which is crucial for making informed decisions. As prices increase across key areas like food, housing, and services, consumers find themselves needing to spend more just to keep up with their standard of living. This is what we call the defining burden of inflation. When prices go up, your dollar doesn't stretch as far as it used to, meaning your purchasing power decreases. So, even if your income stays the same, you're effectively getting less for the money you spend. This slide highlights how inflation impacts everyday life, making it clear why rising prices are a significant concern for households and the economy as a whole. It's a reminder that when prices increase, the value of money diminishes, affecting how we plan our budgets and manage our finances. The acceleration in March indicates that inflation is still a persistent challenge, making the Federal Reserve's path forward more complicated. When inflation remains high, it affects everything from interest rates to economic growth, so it's a critical issue to monitor. Now let's look at real wages. In March 2026, real average hourly earnings actually fell by 0.6%. This means that even though nominal wages, the number we see in our paychecks, might be rising, workers' purchasing power is declining. Essentially, inflation is outpacing paychecks, so people can buy less with their earnings than they could before. The inflation rate, measured by the Consumer Price Index, is above the target set by the Fed. Currently, it's at plus 2.6%, above the 2% goal the Fed aims for to keep inflation healthy and stable. When we look at core inflation, which excludes volatile food and energy prices, it's at 3.3% on an annual basis. This non-seasonally adjusted number shows that inflation remains elevated beyond desired levels. For all items, including everything we buy daily, the seasonally adjusted inflation rate is at 0.9% annually. And on a monthly basis, the CPI has increased, highlighting ongoing price pressures. All these indicators show that inflation remains a key concern, and it's influencing the Federal Reserve's decisions and the overall economic outlook. Understanding these trends helps us grasp the bigger picture of where the economy is headed. So, what we're seeing here is that the real value of savings accounts and fixed income investments actually declines when inflation outpaces the interest rates we earn on those savings. In other words, if inflation is higher than the interest you're getting, your money is losing purchasing power over time. Now, this leads to what we call eroded savings. Essentially, inflation benefits borrowers because they end up repaying their loans with dollars that are worth less than when they borrowed them. But at the same time, this hurts savers and lenders because their savings are effectively shrinking in real terms. This situation also causes what we refer to as wealth redistribution. High or volatile inflation makes it very challenging for both businesses and individuals to plan ahead, invest wisely, or stick to a budget. When prices are unpredictable, it becomes a lot harder to make sound financial decisions. And this connects directly to economic uncertainty. When inflation is high, the same paycheck now buys fewer goods and services, which hits lower-income households the hardest. They feel this pinch more acutely because a larger portion of their income goes toward essentials. All of these factors, eroded savings, wealth redistribution, economic uncertainty, highlight why inflation is such a concern. It impacts not just individual finances, but the stability and predictability of the entire economy. After hovering near the Fed's 2% target for several months, inflation suddenly surged to 3.3% in March 2026. This sharp increase has definitely reignited concerns about maintaining price stability. It also raises questions about how the Federal Reserve might adjust interest rates in the near future to keep inflation in check. If you recall, the CPI trend shows how inflation has been relatively stable, but this recent spike reminds us that these shifts can happen quickly and have significant implications for the economy. So, understanding this trend is crucial as we consider the broader economic outlook and the Fed's possible policy responses moving forward. The relationship between labor markets and price levels is one of the most fundamental, and actually, one of the most debated, dynamics in all of macroeconomics. It really touches on how employment, wages, and inflation all interact with each other. When we think about connecting jobs and inflation, what we're really looking at is how changes in the labor market influence the overall price level in the economy. For example, if the labor market is tight, meaning low unemployment and high demand for workers, wages tend to rise. And higher wages can lead to higher costs for businesses, which they might pass on to consumers in the form of higher prices. Conversely, if unemployment is high and the labor market is slack, wage growth tends to slow down, which can help keep inflation in check. So, understanding this relationship helps us see how shifts in employment and wages can drive inflation, something crucial when we're trying to manage economic stability. This connection between jobs and prices is central to the overall theme of macroeconomic policy, balancing growth, employment, and inflation to keep the economy healthy. The Phillips curve is a historical relationship, not an iron law. Modern economies have challenged and complicated this dynamic. When labor markets are tight, meaning unemployment is low, workers gain more bargaining power, which often leads to wages rising. Higher wages, in turn, increase business costs, and those costs are typically passed on to consumers as higher prices. This creates a trade-off that has guided monetary policy for decades. Essentially, the Phillips curve shows us that lower unemployment tends to be associated with higher inflation, and vice versa. It's a foundational economic concept that helps us understand the delicate balance policymakers try to manage between employment and price stability. Let's take a closer look at some recent trends in labor costs. Over the next year, benefit costs are projected to increase by about 3.4%. This includes things like health insurance and other employee benefits. Similarly, wages and salaries are expected to rise by roughly 3.3% over the same period. When we combine these, total compensation costs are also forecasted to grow by around 3.4%. Now, why does this matter? Rising labor costs are often passed on to consumers, especially in service sectors where wages make up a significant part of the overall costs. The Employment Cost Index, or ECI, is considered the gold standard for tracking these changes. It helps us understand how wage inflation acts as a driving force behind service prices. In essence, as wages and benefits increase, businesses tend to pass those costs along to us, which can contribute to overall inflation. This connection between rising labor costs and consumer prices is a critical piece of the broader economic picture we're exploring today. This self-reinforcing cycle is a key reason why central banks often act preemptively. They raise interest rates early on to cool down labor markets before wage growth fully translates into broader inflation. When wages rise, it increases business costs, which can then lead to higher prices. Higher wages and rising business costs often stem from high labor demand and low unemployment, which tend to push wages up quickly. This creates a feedback loop known as the wage price feedback loop, where rising wages lead to higher prices, and those higher prices can, in turn, lead to demands for even higher wages. Understanding this cycle helps explain why central banks try to intervene early, to prevent this loop from spiraling out of control and fueling persistent inflation. It's all about managing expectations and keeping inflation in check before it becomes too entrenched in the economy. As we look into early 2026, we're seeing challenges that really test the traditional Phillips curve. You know, the idea that inflation and unemployment are closely linked. But here's the interesting part. Productivity gains driven by AI are boosting output significantly, yet we're not seeing a corresponding rise in jobs. This suggests that wage pressures might be decoupling from the usual labor market tightness we've relied on before. What does this mean? Well, policymakers are facing a genuinely new environment. It's not just about managing inflation and unemployment anymore. It's about navigating a landscape shaped by technology and productivity shifts that are fundamentally different. This slide highlights a modern dilemma. We're experiencing strong economic growth, yet stubborn inflation persists, and hearing remains slow. It's a tricky balancing act. This situation underscores the importance of approaching policy decisions carefully and relying on data to guide us through these uncharted waters. Ultimately, the environment has changed, and our tools and strategies need to adapt accordingly. When inflation outpaces wage growth, living standards can actually go down, even if the economy appears to be growing on paper. In March 2026, we saw that real average hourly earnings fell by 0.6%. That means, despite most workers getting paid more in their paychecks, they actually lost ground in terms of what they can buy with that money. It's important to understand the difference between nominal wages and real wages. Nominal wages are simply what you see on your paycheck, what you earn before adjusting for inflation. But real wages tell the full story. They show what you can actually buy after accounting for inflation. So, even if your nominal wages are increasing, if inflation is rising faster, your purchasing power is shrinking. This is why real wages are such a crucial measure. They give us the true picture of how well workers are actually doing financially. It all ties back to the broader theme that economic growth isn't just about numbers. It's about how those numbers translate into everyday living standards. When real wages fall, it means that even if you're earning more or working harder, the actual value of that income is shrinking. This is because rising prices, what we often refer to as inflation, erode your purchasing power. Essentially, the extra money you make is being quietly taken away by higher costs for goods and services. This is what I call a hidden tax on every American household. It's not a tax you see on your paycheck, but one that impacts your everyday life, making it harder to buy the same things you used to. So the key question becomes, are your wages keeping up with inflation? If they're not, then despite your efforts, your standard of living could be stagnating or even declining. And this ties into the larger theme of today's presentation, how economic factors like inflation and wages directly affect our financial well-being. It's important to understand these dynamics so we can better navigate and advocate for policies that protect our income. Timely and accurate economic data truly is the lifeblood of good policy and informed decision-making. It's what economists rely on to get a clear picture of how the economy is doing. These data points act as the tools we use to diagnose the health of the economy, much like a doctor uses vital signs to assess a patient. When data is current and precise, policymakers can respond quickly to emerging issues or opportunities. In this way, monitoring the economic pulse becomes essential for making smarter decisions that benefit everyone. So, throughout this presentation, remember that reliable data isn't just numbers. It's the foundation for effective economic strategies. Let's take a look at some real-time labor market insights that are released ahead of the official BLS reports. These indicators give us a more immediate sense of what's happening in the job market. First, we have the Chicago Fed indicators, which track changes in labor costs, wages, and benefits. Think of this as a leading signal for wage inflation. How quickly wages are rising can give us clues about future inflation pressures. Next is the Employment Cost Index. This is considered the benchmark measure of consumer-level inflation because it captures changes in labor costs that directly impact consumers, like wages and benefits. Then there's the Consumer Price Index, which is our go-to for monthly inflation tracking. It reflects the prices consumers are paying for a basket of goods and services, helping us understand the inflation environment. We also look at monthly job creation, trends across both the private and public sectors, represented by non-farm payrolls. This helps us gauge overall economic momentum and employment growth. Finally, the unemployment rate is our primary measure of joblessness within the labor force. It's a key indicator of labor market health and how many people are actively seeking work but cannot find it. Together, these indicators are crucial for understanding the current state and future direction of the labor market, and they tie into our overall theme of economic resilience and inflation management. Let's talk about the support conditions for achieving the highest level of sustainable employment. When we aim for maximum employment, the goal is to keep inflation close to our 2% target. We do this by adjusting interest rates, raising or lowering them as needed, to influence economic activity. At the same time, price stability is crucial. Central banks, like the U.S. Federal Reserve, rely heavily on labor and inflation data to guide their decisions. They use this information to fine-tune monetary policy, balancing two key mandates: promoting maximum employment and maintaining price stability. So, the role of policymakers is really about using these indicators to create a stable environment. This helps ensure that employment levels are high enough to support a healthy economy, while inflation remains controlled. It's a careful balancing act, but essential for sustainable growth. Individuals, businesses, and policymakers who understand these dynamics are in a much better position to adapt, plan, and ultimately thrive in this ever-changing economic landscape. When we talk about empowering better decisions, it's crucial to recognize how deeply jobs and inflation are connected. Changes in one don't happen in isolation. They ripple through the economy, affecting interest rates, investment, and overall growth. Understanding these connections is key. By regularly tracking indicators like the Consumer Price Index, unemployment rate, and Employment Cost Index, we can get a clearer picture of where the economy is headed, often before it shows up in our everyday lives or wallets. And that's really at the heart of staying informed, being proactive rather than reactive. The relationship between labor markets and price stability is complex and constantly changing, but it's incredibly important because it impacts every household and every business. Navigating economic uncertainty might seem daunting, but with a solid understanding of these connections, we can make smarter decisions, adapt more effectively, and position ourselves to succeed despite the challenges.